My name is Natalie Reynolds, 28, a marketing executive in Boston with an impressive portfolio, stellar performance reviews, and a father who's mastered the art of disguising cruelty as accidents. For years, Richard Reynolds undermined my achievements with small mishaps that left me doubting myself. That family party was supposed to be different. My big promotion finally acknowledged. Instead, champagne soaked my dress as he smirked, "Oops, just an accident." Before I tell you how I finally stood up to my father's manipulation after 28 years, take a second to let me know where you're watching from, and subscribe if you've ever dealt with a toxic family member. Trust me, what happened next is something you won't believe. Growing up in the Reynolds household meant having every material comfort imaginable, and a persistent emotional chill that no amount of money could warm. Our 5-bedroom colonial in Wellesley, Massachusetts projected success to the outside world. Manicured lawn, luxury cars in the driveway, and a family that seemed picture-perfect during the rare times we were photographed together. Behind closed doors, the atmosphere shifted dramatically. Richard Reynolds built his financial advisory firm from nothing, a fact he reminded us of daily. A tall, imposing man with salt and pepper hair and a smile that charmed clients but rarely reached his eyes when focused on me. His business success made him respected in our community, frequently featured in local business publications and sought after for advice. To colleagues and friends, he was brilliant, generous, and the embodiment of the American dream. To his daughter, he was an unpredictable force I desperately tried to please. My mother, Elaine, a former art history professor who abandoned her career when she married Richard, maintained our household with quiet efficiency. She loved me, I never doubted that, but her protection came in small, secret ways. An encouraging note in my lunchbox, a gentle squeeze of my hand under the dinner table after my father criticized my grades. She never openly contradicted Richard, having learned early in their marriage that peacekeeping was her assigned role. Then there was my brother Marcus, 2 years older, and the undisputed golden child. His academic and athletic achievements were celebrated with expensive gifts and proud speeches at family gatherings. When he chose to follow in our father's footsteps, majoring in finance and joining a prestigious investment firm, Richard's pride was palpable. "That's my boy," he'd say, arm around Marcus's shoulders while I stood in the periphery, always slightly out of frame. My childhood memories are punctuated by accidents that somehow always affected my achievements. The watercolor painting that won a school contest, ruined when my father tripped and spilled coffee on it the night before it was to be displayed. The college application essays on my desk that mysteriously disappeared, only to be found by my father after the submission deadlines. My high school graduation party where Richard forgot to send invitations to my friends, but remembered to invite all his business associates. "You're too sensitive," Natalie became his refrain whenever I questioned these occurrences. It was just an accident. Why would I deliberately do something like that? The gaslighting was so effective that for years I believed I was imagining things, that I was indeed too emotional, too reactive, too much of everything that wasn't valued in the Reynolds household. Despite this, or perhaps because of it, I worked relentlessly to create my own path. I rejected the finance track that had been assumed for me since birth, discovering a passion for marketing during a college internship. The creative strategy, the psychology of consumer behavior, the measurable impact of campaigns. Everything about it felt right in a way nothing in my father's world ever had. After graduating from Northeastern with honors, I landed an entry-level position at Marathon Marketing, a mid-sized agency with an impressive client roster. Over 6 years, I worked my way up from assistant to coordinator to manager, and finally, just last month, to senior marketing director. Each promotion came from demonstrated results, late nights perfecting pitches, and an intuitive understanding of brand positioning that even competing agencies recognized. The promotion to senior marketing director was significant. I would lead a team of 12, manage our 3 largest client accounts, and have a voice in the agency's strategic direction. When the announcement was made, colleagues celebrated with champagne in the office. My boss, Kathleen Walsh, a sharp-minded woman who had become something of a mentor, pulled me aside. "Your father must be incredibly proud," she said, squeezing my arm. I nodded and smiled, not wanting to admit that Richard had responded to my excited phone call with marketing director. "Is that like an advertising person? Well, I suppose someone has to do those jobs." The annual Reynolds family gathering was scheduled for the following weekend, a tradition my father insisted upon to maintain appearances of a close-knit family. Relatives from across the Northeast would converge on my parents' home, making it impossible to skip without raising questions. This year, for the first time, I was actually looking forward to it. Surely a director-level position at age 28 would finally merit real acknowledgement. Maybe this would be the turning point in my relationship with my father. I spent hours selecting the perfect outfit, a navy blue sheath dress that conveyed professionalism without seeming like I was trying too hard. I practiced casual ways to mention my accomplishments if asked. I even prepared thoughtful questions about my cousins' lives to show I wasn't self-absorbed, anticipating my father's usual criticism about my self-centeredness. As I drove to my parents' house that Saturday afternoon, hope flickered stronger than it had in years. Maybe this time would be different. Maybe this achievement was finally enough. The Reynolds family gathering was in full swing when I arrived at my parents' suburban mansion. The sprawling property looked particularly impressive that day, with landscapers having clearly been instructed to ensure every hedge was perfectly trimmed and every flower in bloom. The circular driveway was filled with luxury vehicles, my father's black Mercedes, prominently positioned near the entrance naturally. I paused before ringing the doorbell, taking a deep breath and straightening my shoulders. Inside my purse was a small note card where I jotted down modest talking points about my promotion, careful to emphasize the team effort rather than my individual accomplishment. Richard hated what he called showboating. "Natalie, you made it." My mother opened the door, her face lighting up genuinely. She looked elegant as always in a cream-colored pantsuit, pearl earrings, and the slightly anxious expression she wore at all family functions. She embraced me, whispering, "You look beautiful, darling." The house was buzzing with relatives I saw only at these obligatory gatherings. Aunt Lillian, my father's sister, holding court in the living room with stories of her recent Mediterranean cruise. Uncle Henry, my mother's brother, quietly sipping scotch in the corner while his wife mingled more successfully. Cousins comparing career trajectories and vacation photos, marriages, and children, serving as scorecards in the unspoken family competition. There she is. My father's booming voice carried across the foyer as he approached, martini in hand. The advertising girl herself. Marketing director Dad I corrected gently, forcing a smile. "Good to see you." "Marketing, advertising. It's all selling things to people who don't need them, isn't it?" He chuckled, clapping me on the shoulder just hard enough to be uncomfortable. Come in, come in. Your brother just got here too." And there was Marcus, surrounded by admiring relatives, looking every bit the successful financier in his tailored suit. At 30, he had already reached vice president at his firm, a fact my father mentioned to anyone who stood still long enough to hear it. Natalie, Marcus called out, waving me over. Despite being my father's favorite, Marcus and I had maintained a cordial, if not close, relationship. "I heard about your promotion." "That's great." "Thanks," I said, genuinely appreciative of the acknowledgement. "How are things at Morgan Stanley?" Before he could answer, my father interjected. "Marcus just closed a deal with that tech startup. What was it called? Anyway, $15 million in investments. The youngest VP to secure a client that size in the firm's history. $20 million, actually," Marcus corrected, looking slightly embarrassed. But Natalie's news is impressive too. Director level before 30 isn't easy. My father's expression flickered briefly, a familiar tightening around his eyes that I'd learned to recognize as displeasure. "Well, marketing isn't exactly real business, is it? No offense, Natalie. Someone has to make the pretty advertisements." He laughed as if he'd made a harmless joke. I felt the familiar sting but maintained my composure. "Actually, Dad, our agency handles strategic brand positioning that directly impacts client revenue. My team's campaign for Boston Medical increased their patient acquisitions by 37% last quarter." He responded already, looking over my shoulder for someone more interesting to talk to. "Get yourself a drink, Natalie. Open bar. At least I know you'll appreciate that with your creative types." As he moved away to greet a late-arriving guest, I felt a gentle touch on my arm. My cousin, Rebecca, Aunt Lillian's daughter, stood beside me with a sympathetic smile. Unlike the competitive undercurrent with other family members, Rebecca and I had always genuinely supported each other. She worked as a child psychologist in Providence and seemed to understand the family dynamics better than anyone. "Your promotion sounds incredible, Nat," she said sincerely. "Tell me everything about it." For the next 15 minutes, I found myself actually enjoying the party as Rebecca asked thoughtful questions about my new role. It was the kind of conversation I'd hoped to have with my father. Professional, respectful, and genuinely interested. As dinner was announced, I felt my spirits lifting slightly. Perhaps the evening wouldn't be a complete emotional minefield after all. We moved toward the formal dining room, where the long mahogany table was set for 16, with the finest china and crystal. Name cards placed everyone in strategic positions. My father at the head, naturally with my mother at the opposite end. I was seated midway down the table between Uncle Henry and a distant cousin's new husband I'd never met. The first course arrived. A delicate crab bisque that my mother had certainly not prepared herself, but would take credit for overseeing. Conversation flowed around business deals, vacation homes, and private school applications for the next generation of Reynolds children. I participated politely, waiting for an appropriate opening to mention my accomplishment. It never came. Instead, as the main course was being served, my father stood to make a toast. This was tradition, the annual Reynolds Family Achievement Speech, where he highlighted the family's successes since the last gathering. My heart quickened. Surely my promotion would feature prominently this year. A toast to the remarkable achievements of the Reynolds family, he began raising his crystal wine glass. Marcus's record-breaking investment deal. My brother-in-law Henry's retirement after 30 distinguished years in banking. My nephew Thomas's acceptance to Harvard Business School. He continued highlighting various family members for several minutes. My hands grew clammy as I waited for my name. And of course, he said, as if an afterthought, Natalie got a promotion at her advertising firm. Now let's talk about the Family Foundation's charitable giving this year. That was it. One sentence sandwiched between genuine accomplishments with my role incorrectly stated yet again. The familiar knot formed in my stomach. Disappointment mixed with anger, mixed with an irrational desire to still somehow earn his approval. Actually, I found myself saying surprising, even myself with the interruption. I'd like to add that the promotion was to Senior Marketing Director, leading a team of 12 and managing our agency's largest account. It's a significant achievement in my field. The table fell uncomfortably silent. My father's expression hardened for a moment before morphing into a benevolent smile that never reached his eyes. Of course it is, honey. We're all very proud of you for playing with logos and taglines, he said dismissively before continuing with his planned speech. From across the table, Rebecca caught my eye and gave me an encouraging nod. It was a small gesture, but in that moment, it meant everything. The house staff began clearing the dinner plates, replacing them with delicate dessert dishes for the chocolate soufflé my mother had ordered from her favorite French bakery. Crystal champagne flutes appeared next to each setting, and the distinct pop of corks being removed signaled the next phase of the evening. Only the best Moet for my family, my father announced as servers poured bubbling champagne into each glass. Nothing but the finest for a Reynolds celebration. The dessert was exquisite as always, but I barely tasted it. The dismissal of my career achievement still stung, and I found myself mentally rehearsing what I would tell my therapist about this evening. Dr. Mitchell would probably ask how I felt about the interaction, and for once, I thought I might actually tell her the truth instead of minimizing. As coffee was being served, Uncle Henry unexpectedly turned to me. Natalie, I'd actually like to hear more about your promotion. My company has been considering updating our marketing strategy, and I'd value your professional opinion. It was a genuine opening, and I felt a flash of gratitude toward my usually quiet uncle. Of course, I replied, straightening in my chair. What specifically are you looking to improve? As I began explaining the difference between traditional marketing approaches and the data-driven strategy my team had been implementing, I noticed other relatives actually listening with interest. Cousin Melissa asked about social media campaigns. Aunt Patricia wondered about marketing for her small business. For a few minutes, I was speaking from a place of confidence and expertise, inhabiting my professional identity rather than my perpetual role as Richard Reynolds' disappointing daughter. What Natalie isn't mentioning, my father's voice cut through the conversation from the head of the table, is that marketing budgets are always the first to be cut during economic downturns. It's not exactly the most stable career path. Actually, Dad, I countered, feeling unusually bold. Perhaps from the combination of champagne and rare family interest, Marathon has grown even during market contractions because businesses understand that strategic marketing provides measurable ROI during challenging times. My father's eyes narrowed slightly. He didn't appreciate being contradicted, especially in front of family. He pushed back his chair and stood raising his champagne flute. "I think it's time for one more toast," he announced, effectively reclaiming control of the room. "To family success in all its forms, even the creative ones." He moved around the table toward me, ostensibly to clink glasses in a show of fatherly support. As relatives raised their flutes and murmured in agreement, Richard paused beside my chair. "A toast to my daughter," he said, his voice carrying just the right note of paternal pride for public consumption. As I half stood to accept this unexpected acknowledgement, I felt the sudden splash of cold liquid across my chest and lap. My father's champagne flute had somehow tipped, pouring its contents directly onto the front of my carefully chosen navy dress. The expensive fabric immediately absorbed the liquid, clinging uncomfortably to my skin. Gasps echoed around the table. For a moment, complete silence fell, as everyone processed what had happened. Then my father's voice, calm and controlled. "Oops, just an accident." Our eyes met, and there it was. That small smirk gone so quickly that no one else would have caught it. But I knew. This was no accident. This was the same pattern, the same deliberate sabotage disguised as clumsiness that had marked every significant moment of my life. "Oh, Richard," my mother exclaimed, jumping up with napkins. "Natalie, darling, come with me. We'll get you cleaned up." "I'm so sorry, sweetheart," my father said, his voice dripping with false concern. "How terribly clumsy of me." Several relatives chuckled nervously. Others looked uncomfortable. I stood frozen champagne dripping onto my shoes, the humiliation burning hotter than any anger I could summon. "These things happen," I finally managed, my voice sounding distant even to my own ears. "Excuse me." I walked with as much dignity as possible to the nearest bathroom, locking the door behind me, before allowing the tears to well up. The woman in the mirror looked pathetic. Dress-ruined makeup beginning to smear, and that same hurt expression I'd worn since childhood. A gentle knock interrupted my thoughts. "Natalie, it's Rebecca. Can I come in?" I hesitated, then unlocked the door. Rebecca slipped inside, immediately wrapping her arms around me. "That was no accident," she whispered. "You saw it too." I pulled back, searching her face. "I've seen it for years, Nat. We all have. The way he undermines you, the accidents that only happen around your achievements." She handed me a clean hand towel. "He does this every time you start to shine. Don't you see the pattern?" I dabbed at my dress, though it was a lost cause. I thought maybe I was imagining it, being too sensitive like he always says. "That's gaslighting, pure and simple," Rebecca said firmly. "I've seen it in my practice with patients who have narcissistic parents. They make you doubt your own reality." "He's my father," I said weakly, the default defense I'd used for years. "Yes, and he should be supporting you, not sabotaging you." Rebecca leaned against the counter. "What would you tell one of your friends if their father treated them this way?" The question hit me hard because I knew the answer immediately. I would tell them it was emotional abuse. I would tell them they deserved better. I would tell them to set boundaries. "I need to go back out there," I said, straightening my shoulders despite the uncomfortable dampness of my dress. "I won't give him the satisfaction of hiding all evening." "That's my girl," Rebecca smiled, squeezing my hand. "And Nat, remember, the problem isn't you. It never was." I returned to the dining room with fake composure, though something had shifted inside me. The conversations had moved on as they always did after one of my father's accidents. But this time, I was watching with new eyes. The way my mother nervously glanced at Richard before speaking. The way my brother carefully framed his comments to avoid paternal disapproval. The entire family dynamic revolved around one man's ego, and suddenly I could see it clearly. "There she is," my father called out jovially. "Good as new, though you might want to invest in some stain remover for that dress." The relatives laughed politely. I smiled tightly and took my seat, but inside a small flame of determination had been lit. This would be the last time Richard Reynolds publicly humiliated me. I just didn't yet know how I would ensure that. The week after the family gathering passed in a blur of work responsibilities and sleepless nights. The champagne stain never came out of my navy dress, and I eventually threw it away, unable to look at it without remembering the humiliation. But something else remained. A nagging awareness that had taken root that night, growing stronger with each passing day. Tuesday evening found me in Dr. Kimberly Harris's office for my bi-weekly therapy session. I'd been seeing her for about 6 months initially for what I'd described as general anxiety. Until now, I'd carefully avoided discussing my father in any meaningful way. "You seem different today," Natalie Dr. Harris observed as I settled into the comfortable chair across from her. She was in her 50s with kind eyes that somehow saw through my usual deflections. "Something happened at my family gathering," I began hesitantly. Then, surprising myself, I recounted the entire champagne incident in detail, including Rebecca's observations about the pattern. "And has this sort of thing happened before?" Dr. Harris asked gently when I finished. The question opened a floodgate. Suddenly, I was recalling incidents I hadn't allowed myself to think about in years. My voice grew stronger with each example. In 9th grade, I spent weeks on a science project about renewable energy. The night before the fair, my father offered to help me load it into his car for safekeeping. Somehow the solar panels got crushed. "Just trying to be helpful," he said. I stood up, pacing the office as memories surfaced. My college acceptance letter to NYU mysteriously disappeared from the mail. He found it a week after the confirmation deadline had passed. I had to defer a year. When I landed my first real job interview in Boston, he gave me directions to the office. They were wrong. I ended up 30 minutes late and didn't get the position. Last Christmas, I brought my boyfriend Jason home to meet the family. Dad spent the entire dinner interrogating him about his financial prospects and telling embarrassing stories from my childhood. Jason broke up with me a week later, saying my family was too intense. I finally collapsed back into the chair, emotionally exhausted. "Am I crazy, Dr. Harris? Am I seeing a pattern that isn't there?" She considered me thoughtfully before responding. "What you're describing, Natalie, sounds like a consistent pattern of undermining behavior often seen in people with narcissistic tendencies. These accidents happen too consistently around your achievements to be coincidental." Narcissistic, I echoed the word, feeling both foreign and strangely fitting. "But he's so successful, so respected in the community." "Narcissists often are," she replied. "They can be highly functioning, even charismatic to outside observers. But within family systems, particularly with children who threaten their sense of superiority or control, they can be subtly destructive." "But he's my father," I said, the familiar defense mechanism activating. "Yes, and that makes this particularly difficult to recognize and address." Dr. Harris leaned forward slightly. "We have strong cultural programming about respecting and loving our parents. But parents are human with their own psychological issues. Some, unfortunately, are incapable of celebrating their children's successes if they perceive those successes as competition." The session continued as Dr. Harris helped me identify the manipulation tactics my father had employed throughout my life. Gaslighting, public humiliation, dismissing achievements, triangulation with my brother, and maintaining the public image of a devoted father while privately undermining my confidence. I left her office with a recommended reading list on narcissistic family dynamics and a strange mixture of grief and relief. There was a name for what I'd experienced. I wasn't crazy or too sensitive, but the realization that my father's love had always been conditional, if it existed at all, opened a wound I hadn't allowed myself to acknowledge. That evening, my mother called. Her voice had the forced cheerfulness I recognized as her coping mechanism. "Darling, I was just checking in after Sunday's little mishap. Your father feels terrible about the champagne." "Does he?" I asked, unable to keep the skepticism from my voice. A pause. "Of course he does, Natalie. It was an accident." "Was it, Mom? Like all the other accidents that happen whenever I accomplish something?" Her silence spoke volumes. "Dad doesn't feel terrible," I continued, the week's revelations emboldening me. "If he did, he would call me himself to apologize." "Well, you know your father isn't good with apologies," she said softly. "But he loves you very much." The conversation continued with my mother making excuses as she had my entire life. Before hanging up, she mentioned almost casually, "By the way, Aunt Lillian called today concerned about you. Apparently your father mentioned you seemed emotionally fragile at dinner. He's worried you're working too hard at that marketing job, and it might be affecting your stability." The second betrayal hit me like a physical blow. Not content with publicly humiliating me, my father was now actively undermining my reputation within the extended family, painting me as emotionally unstable. "What exactly did he tell Aunt Lillian?" I asked, struggling to keep my voice steady. "Oh, just that you've been under a lot of pressure with the new position and might need some family support. Nothing to worry about, dear. After hanging up, I sat in stunned silence for several minutes before picking up my phone again. I called Rebecca, who confirmed my suspicions. "He's telling everyone you overreacted to a simple accident," she said grimly. "Uncle Richard said we should all keep an eye on you because the pressure of your new job might be too much for someone with your sensitive nature." The familiar hot shame washed over me, quickly replaced by something new: cold, clarifying anger. This was character assassination, plain and simple, a preemptive strike to discredit me if I ever spoke up about his behavior. I spent that night researching narcissistic family dynamics, reading first-hand accounts from adult children of narcissistic parents that mirrored my experiences with unsettling accuracy. The isolation, the gaslighting, the subtle sabotage, the golden child divided by scapegoat dynamic between siblings. It was all there laid out in psychological literature and personal testimonies. One passage particularly resonated. The narcissistic parent sees their child not as an individual with their own identity, but as an extension of themselves. Achievements by the child are either threats to be sabotaged or trophies to be claimed, depending on whether they align with the parent's self-image. How many of my life choices had been influenced by this dynamic? How many opportunities had I missed because of my father's interference? How much of my anxiety was actually a normal response to constant psychological undermining? As dawn broke, I made a decision. The upcoming industry awards ceremony, where I was to receive recognition for the Boston Medical campaign, would be my line in the sand. I had invited my parents out of obligation, never expecting them to attend, but now, if they showed up, I would be prepared. No more accepting the unacceptable. No more pretending the emperor wasn't naked. I would stand in my truth, even if I stood alone. The Beacon Marketing Awards was the industry's premier recognition event in New England, held annually at the historic Parker House Hotel in downtown Boston. Being nominated for the Healthcare Campaign of the Year category was significant professional validation, particularly for someone my age. The gold envelope with my invitation had arrived a month earlier, and I'd immediately called Kathleen to share the excitement. "You've earned this, Natalie," she'd said. The Boston Medical campaign was brilliant, strategy executed flawlessly. Take someone special and enjoy your moment in the spotlight. I'd sent obligatory invitations to my parents, explaining the significance while keeping my expectations realistic. "It's a formal industry event that might not interest you, but I wanted to extend the invitation anyway. The unspoken subtext, please don't come and ruin this for me." My brother Marcus had actually called to congratulate me when he heard about the nomination. "That's impressive, Nat." "Really?" His voice had carried genuine pride, making me wonder if he was finally seeing the family dynamic more clearly. When the evening of the awards ceremony arrived, I stood in front of my mirror, making final adjustments to my outfit. An elegant black jumpsuit with a subtle silver thread running through the fabric. Professional but striking. My hair was styled in loose waves, and I'd splurged on professional makeup application. The woman reflected back at me looked confident, successful, and nothing like the champagne-soaked figure from the family dinner. My date for the evening, my college friend Sophia, texted that she was downstairs in the Uber. Unlike bringing a romantic partner who might be intimidated by my father, Sophia was the perfect companion. Fiercely loyal and completely unimpressed by displays of wealth or status. She'd witnessed some of Richard's behavior during our college years and had never minced words about her assessment. "Your dad's a jerk, Nat." A charming jerk, but still a jerk. The Parker House ballroom was transformed for the evening, with crystal chandeliers casting a warm glow over elegantly set tables. Industry leaders mingled during the cocktail hour, and I found myself engaged in several substantial conversations about upcoming trends and potential collaborations. This was my world where my opinions were valued and my expertise recognized. Natalie Reynolds. The familiar voice behind me sent a chill down my spine. I turned to find my parents standing there, my father resplendent in his custom tuxedo, my mother elegant but tense in a conservative gown. "Mom, Dad, I didn't expect you to come. I managed genuinely surprised." "And miss our daughter's big night." My father's voice boomed, attracting attention from nearby groups. "We wouldn't dream of it." Richard Reynolds. He continued, extending his hand to the creative director I'd been speaking with. "Natalie's father." "Brad Winston," the man replied, shaking his hand. "Your daughter's campaign was exceptional. You must be very proud." "Oh, absolutely," my father beamed. "I always encouraged her creative side. In fact, many of her marketing instincts come from watching me build my business. Isn't that right, Natalie? Before I could respond, he had smoothly inserted himself into the circle of industry professionals, subtly positioning me to the periphery of my own conversation. It was a familiar maneuver, one he'd perfected at family functions, but was now deploying in my professional space. Richard Reynolds Financial, of course, he was saying. We manage over $500 million in assets. Taught Natalie everything she knows about business strategy. I caught Sophia's eye across the room, and she raised an eyebrow in silent question. I gave a subtle nod, and she immediately made her way over. Mr. Reynolds, she interrupted smoothly, I believe they're asking nominees to check in at the front table. Natalie, we should go. I excused myself, gratefully allowing Sophia to guide me away. Your dad works fast, she muttered. He's been here, 5 minutes, and he's already hijacking your spotlight. Classic Richard Reynolds, I sighed. I honestly never thought they'd come. The awards dinner proceeded with the expected industry speeches and acknowledgments. My category would be announced after the main course. Kathleen, seated at our agency's table, kept shooting concerned glances toward my parents, seated at a neighboring table where my father was charming everyone within earshot. Is that your father? She whispered at one point. He's quite charismatic. That's one word for it, I replied, forcing a smile. When my category was finally announced, I felt a surge of nervousness that had nothing to do with public speaking and everything to do with my father's presence. The competition was stiff. Campaigns from agencies twice our size, with budgets to match. When Marathon Marketing, Boston Medical Campaign was called as the winner, our table erupted in cheers. Kathleen squeezed my hand as I stood. You deserve this, she said firmly. I approached the podium with practiced confidence, accepted the Crystal Award, and delivered my prepared remarks, acknowledging my team and the client's collaboration. As applause filled the room, I allowed myself a moment of pure professional pride. This was earned through my work, my vision, my execution. The moment was short-lived. As I posed for the official photographer afterward, award in hand, my father somehow materialized beside me, placing his arm around my shoulders. Let me get in there, he said jovially to the photographer. Proud father moment. What should have been a professional photo documenting my achievement instantly became a family portrait with my father at center stage. I maintained my smile through several flashes, then excused myself to rejoin my colleagues. For the remainder of the evening, my father worked the room like he was the host, rather than a guest introducing himself to industry leaders and casually mentioning his advisory role in my career development. I watched with growing unease as he spoke with Kathleen and several members of our agency's executive team. Finally, needing a moment away from the spectacle, I retreated to a quiet hallway outside the ballroom. Leaning against the wall, I closed my eyes and took several deep breaths. There you are. I opened my eyes to find my father approaching 2 glasses of champagne in hand. He offered one to me with a benevolent smile that didn't reach his eyes. Quite an evening, Natalie. Smaller industry than I expected, but some solid connections to be made. This isn't a networking opportunity for you, Dad, I said, not accepting the champagne. This is my professional achievement. Don't be ridiculous, he chuckled. All events are networking opportunities. Besides, I've already made myself useful. Your boss Kathleen seems impressive. We had quite the conversation about the agency's growth strategy. Something in his tone set off alarm bells. What exactly did you talk about? Oh, this and that. Your campaign, obviously. I mentioned I was surprised they gave such significant responsibility to someone so early in their career. He sipped his champagne casually. Just looking out for you, making sure they're not setting you up to fail with unrealistic expectations. The blood drained from my face. You told my boss I'm not ready for my position, after I just won an industry award confirming exactly the opposite. Now don't overreact, he said, his voice taking on the patronizing tone I knew so well. I simply expressed a father's natural concern about work-life balance. Mentioned that you've seemed a bit emotionally fragile lately. Stressed. Prone to sensitivity. The third betrayal cut deepest of all. This wasn't just sabotaging a science project or ruining a dress. This was directly threatening my career, the one area of my life I'd managed to build independent of his influence. How dare you, I said, my voice low but intense. You had absolutely no right to discuss me with my boss. I'm your father, he replied, as if that explained everything. I'm looking out for your best interests, even when you can't see them yourself. My best interests? I couldn't contain the incredulous laugh. When have you ever cared about my best interests? You've been sabotaging me my entire life." His expression hardened the public mask, slipping for a moment to reveal the cold control beneath. "You're being dramatic, Natalie. This is exactly the emotional instability I'm concerned about." "This isn't instability, Dad. It's clarity. For the first time, I'm seeing exactly what you've been doing all these years." A couple of industry colleagues rounded the corner, then awkwardly retreated upon sensing the tension. My father immediately reassumed his charming persona, smiling broadly. "Just having a little father-daughter chat," he called after them. "Parent stuff, you know how it is." Turning back to me, he lowered his voice. "You're imagining things, Natalie. I've only ever supported you. If you're feeling paranoid or persecuted, perhaps you should consider speaking with someone professional about these delusions." The gaslighting was so familiar, it almost worked. For a moment, I felt the old doubt creeping in. Was I overreacting, misinterpreting his intentions? Then I remembered Dr. Harris's words. "Trust your perception. Your feelings are valid responses to real experiences." "I need to get back to my colleagues," I said, straightening my shoulders. "Please don't approach my boss or anyone else from my company again." His laugh was dismissive. "Don't be ridiculous. I'll speak with whoever I please." As I walked away, returning to the ballroom where my awards sat on the agency table, I felt a strange mixture of despair and determination. My father had brought his sabotage into my professional world, potentially undermining the career I'd built with years of hard work. But in doing so, he had also crossed a line that clarified everything. This wasn't love. This wasn't protection. This was control, pure and simple, and it had to stop. I just didn't yet know how. The glowing digits of my bedside clock read 1:37 a.m. when my phone vibrated with an incoming call. Kathleen's name flashed on the screen, sending an immediate surge of adrenaline through my system. My boss never called this late, unless something was seriously wrong. "Kathleen," I answered, sitting up in bed and switching on the lamp. "Is everything okay?" "I'm sorry to call so late, Natalie." Her voice sounded strained, professional, but tense. "I just got off a rather disturbing call with the board, and I felt I needed to speak with you immediately." My stomach dropped. "What's happened?" "I received calls from 3 separate board members expressing concerns about the Reynolds Tech proposal. Specifically concerns about your leadership of the project." She paused. "Apparently, they received detailed information about potential weaknesses in our strategy." "That's impossible," I said, fully alert now. "We haven't shared the strategy details with anyone outside our immediate team. The proposal isn't even finalized yet." "That's what makes this particularly troubling, Natalie. The concerns cited specific elements we discussed only in our closed planning meeting yesterday." Another pause. "Elements that you discussed with your father at the awards ceremony." I started then, stopped as the realization dawned. "My father called the board members." "Not directly," Kathleen said carefully. "But Richard Reynolds apparently plays golf with James Hartwell, who sits on both our board and the Reynolds Tech board of directors. The concerns came through him initially, then spread. The fourth betrayal struck with devastating precision. My father had taken information gleaned from our conversation, likely supplemented with whatever he'd managed to extract from my colleagues at the awards ceremony, and used it to sabotage the biggest potential client acquisition of my career. Reynolds Tech was unrelated to his financial firm. This wasn't even a competitive move. It was purely about control." "Kathleen, I never discussed confidential strategy with my father." I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "He must have overheard something or made assumptions." "I believe you," she said after a moment, "which is why I'm calling you directly instead of scheduling a formal review. But Natalie, perception matters in this business. 3 board members are now questioning your professional judgment." "What happens now?" I asked, dreading the answer. "The Reynolds Tech pitch is being reassigned to Thomas's team as a precaution. And," she hesitated, "we need to postpone your oversight of the Johnson account, pending a review of confidentiality protocols." The implications were clear. In a single night, my father had managed to undo months of professional progress. The Johnson account was supposed to be my opportunity to demonstrate leadership on a national campaign. Without it, my director-level position became largely ceremonial. After assuring Kathleen I understood the situation and would cooperate fully with any review process, I ended the call and sat motionless in my darkened bedroom. The familiar mixture of shame, anger, and helplessness threatened to overwhelm me, but something else was building beneath those emotions. A cold, clear resolve. This pattern would continue indefinitely unless I took decisive action. My father would never stop undermining me as long as he had the power to do so. Every achievement would be diminished, every opportunity sabotaged, every relationship poisoned. I began pacing my apartment mind, racing through possible responses. A confrontation, he would deny everything and paint me as unstable as he'd already begun to do. Cutting contact, he would play the victim to extended family while continuing to interfere in my career through his connections. Legal action. For what being a manipulative father, there was no law against psychological sabotage. Around 3 a.m., my phone chimed with a text from Rebecca. Just heard from Mom about Reynolds Tech. This has gone too far, Nat. Call me when you can. I'm here for you. Shortly after, Marcus called, surprising me. Natalie, are you okay? Dad's been calling everyone, saying you're having some kind of breakdown over work stress. I'm not having a breakdown, Marcus, I replied, the calm in my voice surprising even me. I'm finally seeing clearly. Dad sabotaged my client pitch using information he gathered at the awards ceremony. A long silence followed. That sounds, he began hesitantly, unbelievable paranoid. That's what he wants everyone to think. I was going to say not entirely out of character, Marcus finished, shocking me. I've been thinking about some things since your awards ceremony. The way he always positions himself at the center of everyone else's achievements. The accidents that only happen around you. He sighed. I used to think he was just harder on you because he saw more of himself in me. But lately, I've wondered if it's because he sees something in you that threatens him. The acknowledgement from my brother, who had spent his entire life as our father's favored child, cracked something open inside me. If even Marcus could see the pattern, it wasn't just in my head. After we hung up, I returned to pacing, considering and discarding various options for addressing the situation. Around dawn, exhausted but clear-headed, I sat down at my computer and began searching my email archives and text message history. Years of documentation unfurled before me, emails where my father had accidentally given colleagues or potential employers incorrect information about my availability or qualifications. Text where he'd undermined my confidence before important presentations. Helpful introductions to industry contacts that always somehow positioned me as inexperienced or unstable. I had never deleted these communications, but I had buried them psychologically, unwilling to confront the pattern they revealed. Now organized chronologically, they told a damning story of systematic sabotage spanning my entire career. But documentation wasn't enough. Evidence without a platform for sharing it was useless. I needed a way to break the cycle publicly enough that my father couldn't simply dismiss it as emotional instability. That's when I remembered the LinkedIn Live feature my agency had recently been using for thought leadership videos. As a senior marketing director, I had access to our corporate account with thousands of industry followers, including board members, clients, and key decision makers in our field. A live stream addressing toxic leadership and manipulation in business environments using my own experience as a case study. Not a vengeful expose, but a professional analysis of how psychological manipulation impacts workplace performance and corporate culture. My own story would serve as the central example, supported by the evidence I'd compiled. The marketing professional in me recognized the power of this approach. It would be nearly impossible for my father to dismiss as emotional instability because it would be presented as educational content relevant to business leadership. The documentation would speak for itself, but the daughter in me hesitated. This would irrevocably change my relationship with my father and potentially divide the extended family. My mother would be caught in the middle. There would be no going back. As the sun rose over Boston, illuminating my apartment with golden morning light, my phone lit up with another text, this time from Kathleen. Board emergency meeting called for 10 a.m. Richard Reynolds apparently reached out to James directly with concerns about your emotional stability affecting client relationships. This is unprecedented, Natalie. I need to know what's going on. In that moment, the decision crystallized. My father had escalated from sabotaging my achievements to actively attempting to destroy my career and reputation. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about exposing a pattern of behavior that affected everyone in his orbit. I texted Kathleen back, I'll explain everything. Can we meet privately before the board call? Then, I began organizing my documentation and outlining my livestream content. The button I was preparing to press would change everything, but for the first time in my life, I was ready to stand fully in my truth, whatever the consequences might be. At 8:30 a.m., I sat in Kathleen's office, 2 cups of strong coffee between us and my laptop, open to a carefully organized folder labeled Reynolds Pattern Documentation. "I need to show you something before the board meeting," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "It will explain what's happening with my father and the Reynolds tech situation." For the next 45 minutes, I walked her through selected emails, texts, and documented accidents that demonstrated the pattern of sabotage. I kept the explanation professional, focusing on the facts rather than emotional impact. "This has been happening your entire career?" Kathleen asked when I finished her expression, a mixture of shock and growing anger. "My entire life," I corrected quietly. "But it only started affecting my professional world when I began achieving visible success." She leaned back in her chair, processing. "Natalie, I don't even have words. What do you need from me?" "2 things," I replied. "First, I'd like you to share the Reynolds tech documentation with the board to demonstrate that I never breached confidentiality. Second, I need your support, or at least your understanding, for what I'm about to do." I explained my plan for the LinkedIn Live session, emphasizing that it would be framed as educational content about toxic leadership patterns rather than a personal attack. I would use my own experience as the central case study, but maintain professional language and focus on the business impact of such behavior. "This is risky," Kathleen said frankly, "but I understand why you feel it's necessary." She paused, considering. "The agency won't be able to officially endorse this, you understand. This needs to be your personal LinkedIn, not our corporate account." "I understand," I nodded. "I'm not asking the agency to take a stand. I'm just asking you not to stop me." She studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "The board meeting is still happening, but I'll present the documentation regarding Reynolds Tech. As for the rest, I never had this conversation with you, understood?" It wasn't explicit approval, but it was enough. The board meeting went better than expected. The documentation clearly demonstrated that I had maintained confidentiality and that the concerns raised about the Reynolds tech proposal had originated from misrepresentation. While the pitch would remain with Thomas's team to avoid any appearance of conflict, my position overseeing the Johnson account was reinstated. By 1 p.m., I was back in my apartment setting up for the live stream. I had spent the intervening hours refining my outline, selecting supporting materials, and preparing mentally for what I was about to do. My phone was already filling with messages from my father. Evidently, the board meeting hadn't gone as he'd anticipated. I left them all unread. At precisely 2 p.m., I sat before my camera, professionally dressed and surrounded by the trappings of my legitimate business success. My marketing award visible but not prominently featured in the background. I had chosen a neutral wall, good lighting, and a setup that conveyed authority and credibility. I pressed the button to go live. "Good afternoon, LinkedIn Connections. I'm Natalie Reynolds, Senior Marketing Director at Marathon Marketing, and today I want to discuss a topic that affects many professionals but is rarely addressed openly: how psychological manipulation and undermining behaviors impact business performance and corporate culture." I maintained a calm professional tone as I outlined the various forms such manipulation can take in workplace environments. From gaslighting to sabotage, disguised as help, to reputation, undermining through back-channel communications. To illustrate these patterns, I'm going to share a case study that I have intimate knowledge of, my own experience with these behaviors throughout my career. For the next 30 minutes, I methodically presented selected evidence of my father's interference, keeping the focus on business impact rather than emotional damage. I shared screen captures of emails where he had provided false information to colleagues' texts, revealing his undermining comments before important presentations and documentation of the Reynolds tech situation. This pattern of behavior creates significant business risks beyond personal psychological impact, I explained. It affects team dynamics, client relationships, and ultimately company performance. Organizations need to recognize these patterns and develop protocols to address them. I was just concluding the formal presentation portion when my phone began lighting up with incoming calls and messages. I had deliberately kept my phone visible to monitor the live stream, and I could see my father's name appearing repeatedly. As if on cue, a text from him appeared that was visible to viewers. "What the hell do you think you're doing? End this now or face consequences?" I acknowledged it directly in the live stream. As you can see, confronting these patterns often triggers escalation rather than reflection. This is typical of the manipulation cycle and demonstrates why addressing these behaviors publicly is sometimes necessary when private approaches have failed. Comments were flooding in. Colleagues expressing shock and support industry connections, sharing similar experiences, and several notes from people who recognize the pattern from their own family or work relationships. Then another notification. A text from my mother, Natalie. "Please stop. Your father is very upset. This isn't the way to handle family matters." This was followed almost immediately by one from Marcus. "Holy shit, Nat. Dad is having a complete meltdown, but I think you're right. Call me after." And finally, from Rebecca, "I'm watching. Stay strong." This needed to be said. As the livestream continued, I shifted to addressing questions from viewers, maintaining my professional composure, even as my phone continued to explode with notifications. When a comment asked about the personal cost of speaking out, I answered honestly. There is always a price for truth-telling. Relationships may be damaged or lost. There may be professional consequences, despite my best efforts to focus on education rather than accusation. But there is also a price for silence, and it's one I'm no longer willing to pay. After exactly 1 hour, I concluded the session with practical takeaways for recognizing and addressing manipulation in professional settings, resources for those experiencing similar situations, and a call for greater awareness of how these dynamics affect workplace performance. Thank you for listening. I hope this conversation continues beyond today's session and leads to healthier professional environments for everyone. I ended the live stream and sat in silence for several minutes, adrenaline still coursing through my system. My phone showed 27 missed calls, 43 text messages, and hundreds of LinkedIn notifications. I turned it off completely, needing space to process what I'd just done. The confrontation I had avoided my entire life had finally happened. Not in a heated personal exchange where I could be dismissed as emotional, but in a calm, evidence-based presentation to my professional network. The button I had pressed wasn't just starting a live stream. It was declaring independence from a lifetime of manipulation. Whatever came next, there would be no going back to the way things were before. The truth was finally in the open, visible for anyone who cared to see it. I made myself a cup of tea and waited for the storm. The immediate aftermath of the live stream was exactly the chaos I had anticipated. My phone, when I finally turned it back on several hours later, was overwhelmed with notifications, calls, and messages. I approached them methodically, starting with professional contacts. Kathleen's message was first: "Bold move, Reynolds. Board is in emergency session again. Come to my office first thing tomorrow." This isn't necessarily bad news. Several colleagues had sent variations of "Are you okay?" and I had no idea. More surprisingly, messages from industry connections I barely knew personally expressed support and shared similar experiences with undermining family members or mentors. The LinkedIn post had gone mini-viral within marketing circles, with hundreds of comments and thousands of views in just a few hours. The responses fell into predictable categories: supportive professionals who recognized the pattern I'd described, shocked connections offering solidarity, and a small but vocal minority questioning the appropriateness of airing family laundry in a professional forum. Then there were the family messages. My father had progressed from demanding I stop the livestream to threatening legal action for defamation, to most recently a cold message stating simply, "You've made your choice. Deal with the consequences." My mother had sent a series of increasingly distressed texts, culminating in a voicemail where she was clearly crying. "How could you humiliate your father this way? After everything he's done for you, please call me Natalie. We need to fix this." Marcus's messages were more complex. Initial shock had given way to a kind of reluctant acknowledgement. "I've been thinking about what you said. Some of it rings true. Dad's always been controlling, but I never saw how differently he treated you until now. This is messy, but I think you might be right." Rebecca had sent simple encouragement. "Proud of you. Call when you're ready. I'm here." The extended family had largely fallen into two camps. Those expressing concern about my public breakdown, clearly influenced by my father's perspective, and those reaching out with hesitant support, often sharing their own experiences. With Richard's controlling behavior, Aunt Lillian's message surprised me most. I've watched my brother do this to people my entire life, Natalie. I never had the courage to call it out. You did the right thing, though. The family will be in chaos for a while. Stay strong. I slept poorly that night, but woke with surprising clarity. Whatever happened next, the weight of secrecy had been lifted. The pattern was exposed, named, and documented. Even if some people chose not to believe me, I had spoken my truth. The meeting with Kathleen the next morning was tense but ultimately supportive. The board had concerns about potential blowback, but the overwhelming professional response had been positive. More importantly, several board members had received calls from Richard attempting to have me fired, which had backfired spectacularly by confirming exactly the behavior pattern I had described. You've put us in an awkward position, Kathleen said frankly. But you've also demonstrated exceptional courage and integrity. The board has decided that your position remains secure, with one condition. You need to be transparent about any potential conflicts involving your father going forward. I agreed, readily relieved that my career at least remained intact. Professional consequences settled, I turned to the more difficult personal fallout. After much deliberation, I agreed to meet my mother for coffee at a neutral location, a quiet cafe halfway between our homes. Elaine Reynolds looked older than she had at the family gathering just weeks earlier. Her hands trembled slightly as she stirred her latte, avoiding my eyes. Your father is devastated, Natalie, she began, her voice low. He can't understand why you would publicly humiliate him this way. Mom, I said gently, did you actually watch the live stream? She hesitated. Parts of it. I couldn't bear to see you attacking your father that way. I didn't attack him. I presented a factual account of a pattern of behavior that has affected my entire life and now my career. I didn't even use his name. Everyone knows who you were talking about, she exclaimed, then immediately lowered her voice again. The phone has been ringing constantly. Your father's colleagues, golf partners, clients. Everyone saw it or heard about it. And what have they said? I asked, genuinely curious. She looked down at her coffee. Some have distanced themselves. Others have called with concerns. A few, she hesitated, a few have said they've experienced similar treatment from him. The admission hung between us the first time my mother had ever acknowledged, even indirectly, that my father's behavior might be problematic beyond our family. He wants you to issue a public retraction, she continued. Say it was all a misunderstanding, that you were under work stress, and misinterpreted his attempts to help. I can't do that, Mom. It wouldn't be true. Then he's prepared to cut ties completely, she said, her voice breaking. No financial support, no family connection, no reconciliation. I'm 28 years old with a successful career, I replied calmly. I haven't needed his financial support for years. As for family connection, what connection? Constant undermining and sabotage isn't a relationship worth preserving. Tears welled in her eyes. He's still your father, Natalie. Yes, he is. And I would have preferred a healthy relationship with him. But that was never an option he offered. I reached across the table to take her hand. Mom, I'm not asking you to choose between us. I understand your position is impossible, but I won't retract the truth to protect his ego. Our conversation continued for another hour, covering painful ground, but ultimately reaching a fragile understanding. She wouldn't pressure me to retract my statements. I wouldn't ask her to publicly support my perspective. We would attempt to build our own relationship independent of my father's influence. The meeting with Marcus a week later was surprisingly productive. Away from our father's presence, my brother admitted to recognizing many of the patterns I'd described, though he had experienced them differently as the favored child. He controlled me too, Marcus acknowledged as we walked through Boston Common, just with rewards instead of sabotage. My entire life and career have been shaped around his expectations. I'm only now realizing how little of it has been my own choice. Are you happy at the investment firm? I asked, genuinely curious. He considered this seriously. Parts of it. But I've always been jealous of your courage to pursue what actually interested you. He glanced at me sideways. Though I never understood the price you paid for that choice until now, we began meeting regularly, rebuilding a sibling relationship that had been deliberately fractured by our father's triangulation. Marcus started therapy, beginning his own journey toward recognizing the ways his golden child status had its own emotional costs. The confrontation with my father himself came nearly a month after the live stream. He had demanded a meeting at his office, his territory, his power base. I counter-offered my apartment, We eventually compromised on a private room at a downtown restaurant. Richard Reynolds had aged visibly in the short time since I'd seen him last. The composed, controlling presence had acquired new stress lines, and his eyes held something I'd rarely seen directed at me: caution. "You've created quite a mess, Natalie," he began, skipping any greeting. "I've exposed a pattern, Dad. There's a difference. Do you have any idea what this has done to my reputation, to my business? Clients are asking questions. Colleagues are looking at me differently. I understand that's uncomfortable for you," I said evenly. "I've been experiencing those feelings my entire life when you undermined me." "That's ridiculous. I've only ever tried to help you." "The documentation suggests otherwise," I replied, maintaining eye contact. "The emails, the texts, the accidents, they show a clear pattern of sabotage, not help." "You can interpret things however you want," he scoffed. "That doesn't make your interpretation reality." "Actually, that's exactly what you've done to me for years," I countered. "Interpreted my achievements as threats, my independence as disloyalty, and my success as competition. Your interpretation doesn't make that reality either." The conversation continued in circles, my father alternating between dismissing my claims, attempting to reframe his actions as well-intentioned, and trying to intimidate me with consequences. Unlike previous interactions, however, I remained calm and firm, neither escalating emotionally nor backing down. "Here's what's going to happen moving forward," I finally said, interrupting another round of justifications. "I will maintain minimal structured contact with you at major family events. I will continue my relationship with Mom independently. I will not retract my statements because they are factually accurate. I will not engage in arguments about the past. This is my boundary, and it's non-negotiable." "You don't set the terms in this family," he snapped the mask, slipping to reveal the anger beneath. "I set the terms in my life," I corrected. "You can choose to respect them or not. If not, we won't have any relationship at all." For perhaps the first time in my adult life, I saw genuine confusion in my father's eyes. His usual tactics of manipulation weren't working. The power dynamic had fundamentally shifted. "Think about what you're throwing away," he said, finally rising from the table. "A lifetime of family connection over a misunderstanding." "I'm not throwing anything away," I replied. "I'm establishing the conditions under which a healthier relationship might be possible. The choice to meet those conditions is yours." He left without another word, and I sat alone in the restaurant, feeling neither triumphant nor devastated, just clear. Over the following months, life reorganized around new patterns. Professionally, I thrived the Johnson account, becoming a significant success that helped cement my position at the agency. More surprisingly, my willingness to address toxic workplace dynamics publicly led to speaking opportunities at industry conferences and an expanded professional network. My relationship with my mother gradually strengthened as she cautiously began establishing her own independence from my father's control. Our weekly coffee dates became a sanctuary for both of us, a space where she slowly shared her own experiences and regrets. Marcus and I developed the sibling relationship we should have had all along, supporting each other's growth without competition. He eventually made the difficult decision to leave finance for a teaching position at a business school, a career move that suited his natural mentoring abilities but disappointed our father enormously. Rebecca remained a steadfast ally, helping navigate family events where my father was present and offering perspective when old doubts crept in. The extended family slowly realigned, some members maintaining distance from me, while others tentatively shared their own experiences with Richard's controlling behavior. My father himself maintained cool, formal interactions during unavoidable family gatherings. He never acknowledged the pattern I'd exposed, never apologized, never changed. But his power to affect my life had been neutered by exposure and boundaries. In therapy with Dr. Harris, I continued processing the complex grief of accepting that the father I had always hoped for didn't exist. "You're mourning the relationship you deserved, but never," had she explained. "That's a necessary part of healing." 6 months after the live stream, I received an unexpected LinkedIn message from James Hartwell, the board member who had been my father's golf partner and initial conduit for sabotaging the Reynolds tech pitch. "I owe you an apology, Miss Reynolds. I've known your father for 20 years and experienced his help myself more than once, but never connected the pattern until your presentation. Your courage has been noticed and respected. When you're ready for a new challenge, I'd like to discuss some possibilities." It was the first tangible sign that speaking truth while painful was opening doors rather than closing them. The authentic voice I had suppressed for years out of fear was actually my greatest professional asset. As I wrote a carefully worded response to James, I realized that pressing that button, choosing truth over comfortable silence, hadn't just changed my relationship with my father. It had reset my relationship with myself. The healing wasn't complete and perhaps never would be entirely. But for the first time in my life, I was moving forward on my own terms, free from the manipulative patterns that had constrained me for 28 years. The price of that freedom had been high, but it was worth every penny. The button I pressed wasn't just a live stream, it was the reset on my life. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself and others is to speak the truth even when it costs you. If my story resonated with you today, please share it with someone who might need to hear it. Like this video if you've ever had to set difficult boundaries, subscribe for more real conversations about family dynamics, and comment below what button do you need to press in your own life. Thank you for listening, and remember, your voice matters, your truth deserves to be spoken, and your future belongs to you.